Okay, and so in this video we're going to learn about circles on a coordinate plane. So we're going to be graphing circles on a coordinate grid. So first off, the equation of a circle with a center HK and a radius R is this equation. So you've got your x point minus your h squared plus your y coordinate point minus the k squared is going to equal your r squared. Okay, so again, x and y is just a point on your circle. So you could have an ordered pair. In this instance, it would be a 2, a 2. And HK is the center of your circle. So in this problem, my center is at the origin of 0, 0. Okay? And in this problem, I don't know my radius, but I could find it. So I'm going to show you how you can find the radius if you know a point on the circle and if you know the origin of the circle. So you're going to plug it into your equation. So you're going to start with your x value of a 2 and subtract your h, which was a 0, squared, plus your y value, which was a 2, subtract your k value, which was a 0, squared, and that's how you're going to find your radius. So 2 minus 0 is 2 squared, plus 2 minus 0 is also 2 squared. It's going to equal my r squared. 2 squared is 4, so I'm going to have 4 plus 4 equals r squared. So I would get 8 equals r squared, and to solve for r, you're going to square root both sides. And the square root of 8 is going to be about a 2.8 for your radius. Okay, so if you know the center of the circle and you know a point on the circle, you can plug these values into your equation, okay? Yes, you will have to memorize the equation of a circle for your end of course test. So let's look at a problem. So it wants you to find the center and the radius of each circle. And so what I did was I wrote this formula up here to help us out. And these boxes should be minus signs. So if my equation was x minus 2 squared plus y minus 3 squared equals 9, I want to find the center. And I want to find the radius. And I can pull it from that equation. Okay. So if there is a minus sign, notice it's always in the equations. You're going to change the sign. So that'd be a positive 2 center and then a positive 3 center. Okay, so you're going to have to switch your signs, and then the radius you're going to have to square root it because you've got r squared equals 9, so that means the square root of 9 is a 3, so your radius would be a 3. Okay, so why don't you try number 2, find the center of the circle and then find the radius. So press pause and try that. All right, so for number 2, the center was at a positive 1, negative 5. And the reason I get a negative 5 is because this problem should really have a minus sign in it, which would mean that you would have to have 2 negatives beside each other to get that plus sign. So that means the actual y point is going to be a negative 5 when you change that sign. And then the square root of a 4 was a 2. So that is how you pull information from the equation of a circle. So now let's learn how to write the standard equation from a circle. So you've got your center, which is your HK, and then you've got your radius. So remember our equation is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals my radius squared. So first off, I'm going to have x minus my h, which was a 7, squared, plus my y minus my k, which was a negative 3 squared, which I can make that into a plus sign because 2 negatives will give you positive, equals, and now my 9 squared, and 9 squared is going to be 81. So that's going to be the standard form of the equation of a circle. So why don't you try the second one, press pause, and we'll go over the answer. All right, so you should have had a positive 2 and a positive 8 in those parentheses because 2 negatives will make a positive, and then r squared was a 16. Okay, so that is how you write the equation of a circle given the center and given the radius. Okay. All right, so now we're going to learn how to graph a circle. So first off, you need to find the center, and then you need to find the radius. Okay, now notice I don't have any parentheses, so I don't have any numbers, so this would be like a 0. So if that happens, then your center is going to be at 0, 0. Again, to find your radius, square root that to get a 3. So what we're going to do is graph the center at 0. And then I need to go a couple directions and go a radius of 3. So I'm going to start at the 0 and count up 3 and put a point. I'm also going to go right 3 on that x-axis. I'm also going to go down 3. I'm also going to go left 3. Now if I try my best to connect all those points, that would be a circle. Okay, so you're going to have to go left, right, up, and down the radius to find the graph of the circle. So why don't you try this one on your own, and then press pause and we'll go over the answer. Your graph should have looked like with the center at a -2, +3 from changing those signs. And then the square root of 16 was a 4, so I went up 4, left 4, down 4, and right 4 in the direction to get that circle. So let me know if you have any questions on that. Otherwise, we're going to dive in to writing it from a graph. So when you write it from a graph, you need two things. You need the center, and then you need the radius. Okay, so here's my center. It's located at a +3, -4. And then my radius had a length of a 2. Okay, so now I'm going to write my equation. So I'm going to start off with my h and my k. So I'm going to say x minus h squared plus y minus a k squared. Go ahead and make that a plus. Equals my radius squared. So 2 squared is going to be a 4. Okay. So that's how you pull that information from a graph. Again, to find the radius, you're going to count the number of boxes between those. So why don't you try the next one on your own, press pause, and we'll go over the answer. So write it in a standard equation. Be tripped up and say that the radius is 3 by just counting the box on this one. You had to notice that that grid was going by 2 for each box. So when you count 2, 4, 6, it's going to be 6 boxes to get to that, or 6 units and 3 boxes to get to that radius. So that was a common mistake you could have had. And that center was at a 0, -4. So when you plug it into your equation, you'd have x minus 0, which simplify that further and just write x squared. Okay. And then you should have had y plus a 4, and that would have been 36, because 6 squared is 36. Okay, so if you got 9, that's where you messed up on that one. Okay, so let's take it a little step further and get to some harder questions. So it wants to know what is the standard equation of the circle with that center that passes through a point. So they don't give me the radius. Okay. So I need my radius, I need my center to write the equation of a circle. So first off, I need to find my radius. Okay, now if I connect that center and the point, that's a really bad line, but that's going to be your radius. Okay, so to find your radius, we're going to plug it into our equation, because this is an x point and a y point. And then this is my center of an h and a k. So if I plug that into our equation and solve for my r, that is how we'll find it. So we'll have our equation x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals my r squared. So let's go plug in. So I'll have 2 minus 1 squared plus 2 for the y minus a -3 squared, which will become a plus sign, equals my r squared. 2 minus 1 is a 1 squared, plus 2 plus 3 is a 5 squared, equals r squared. So I would have 25 plus 1, which is 26, equals r squared. So now to solve for my radius, I would technically square root it. But in our equation, it wants r squared. So I can actually leave it as r squared equals 26, because that's going to help me out when I write my equation. So when I write the equation, I'm going to use my center, and then I'm going to use my r squared. The reason that works out is see how r squared is in the equation. So I would have x minus 1 squared plus y minus a negative 3 squared, go ahead and make that a plus, equals 26. So that's going to be the standard form of that circle. So again, if you have a point on the circle and you have the center, you're going to plug them in to your equation and solve for r. You don't have to go all the way to r because your formula has r squared in it. Now you could have said the square root of 26 is 5.099 something, but you would have had to square it to get back in that problem. So you would have got 26 that way. Okay? All right, another kind of problem. If you have a center of a circle, that's the origin, and point 43 is on the circle, is the point -3, -5 on the circle. So what we have to do, let me go ahead and draw a circle. So here's my center, and I've got 4, 3 somewhere over here. So I've got some circle like that. Let's say this is 4, 3. And here's my 0, 0. I basically want to know, is this point -3, -5, is it on the circle? For it to be on the circle, it's got to have the same radius. Okay, so I need to find the radius of this piece and then make sure it equals the radius of the other point. So first off, I'm going to find my radius. And I do that by using my equation. Okay, so let me go ahead and plug in. Again, this is my HK, my center, and this is my X point and my Y point. So I'm going to start off with 4 minus 0 squared plus 3 minus 0 squared equals my R squared. Again, you get 4 squared plus 3 squared equals R squared. 16 plus 9 equals R squared. 25 equals R squared. So when I square root, I get my radius of a 5. Okay? So if I know that from 0 to this point is a radius of a 5, then I know that that point is going to be on the circle as well. So now let me say this is my new X point and my new Y point, and double check to see if I get 5. If I don't get 5, that point's not on the circle. Okay, so I'm going to plug in my equation. -3 minus h squared plus -5 minus my center squared equals my R squared. If I simplify that, you would get -3 squared plus a -5 squared equals R squared. Now again, -3 times a -3 is a positive 9, so when you square something, you always get a positive number. Plus 25 equals R squared. Now I can already see my number is not going to be 5 because I already have 25 plus the number. But you would get 36 equals R squared, and when you square root, you would get a radius of a 6. Okay, so no, -3, -5 is not on the circle. Okay, and that's because their radiuses are not the same. Okay, so to be on the circle, you have to have a point that is the same radius on every single part of that. Okay, all right, let's look at these two. So is 2 square root of 21 on the circle, and is 2 -3 on the circle? So same thing, I need to plug in these values into the equation and solve for r, and make sure I get a 5. So let's make this my new x value and this my new y value, and let's solve for the radius. And I know the center is going to be at 0, 0 still. So I'd have 2 minus 0 squared plus square root of 21 minus 0 squared equals r squared. So let's solve for r and make sure I get a 5. So I've got 2 squared plus, now if you square root of 21 and you square it, let me show you what happens. Square root of 21 times the square root of 21 is just a 21. Okay? These two square roots cancel each other out when you multiply them, and you will get a 21. Equals r squared. So 2 squareds of 4 plus a 21 equals r squared. And guess what? I get 25 equals r squared. So when I square root, r would be a 5. So yes, this point is on the circle because it has the same radius. Okay? So why don't you tell me if 2, -3 is on that circle as well? So press pause and prove to me if this point is on the circle or not. Have gotten that point is not on the circle because once you plug in this point and subtract it from the center, you should have gotten r squared was a 13, which was not a 25, and so the radius is not the same, so it's not going to be on the circle. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions about whether proving a point is on a circle or not. Otherwise, I want you to try this one on your own. So a little bit different, your center is now at a point and not at the origin, but it's still the same process. So tell me whether or not 1, 4 is on that circle, and then tell me whether or not -1 square root of 3 is on that circle as well. So press pause and try them on your own. For the first one, you should have gotten that 1, 4 was on the circle. I found the radius using this center and this point first off because I knew it was on it. So I found the radius and I got r squared equals 13, and I could leave it like that. If you want to take it further, you could. And then I checked this point 1, 4 and this center to make sure they had the same radius. So I did 1 minus -1, which gave me a 2. 4 minus 1 was 3 squared. So they had the same radius, so they were on the circle. This point down here, so I had a -1 and a square root of a 3, and I used my same center, and I want to make sure that I got r squared equals a 13, but you did not. You should have gotten a 0 when you squared that, and when you squared this term, you should have got a 0.54. So that is nowhere near 13, so that point is not on the center of the circle. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions on circles on the coordinate plane. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and now you can practice.